This is When Science Speaks, a new web series profiling innovative and interesting people working in science and technical fields, from academia to industry to the nonprofit world. We explore how to be a powerhouse advocate for science and your research, how to advance your career in meaningful ways that make you happy, and how to push back on the ongoing assault on science and other related issues of interest happening in the world.
Hey everyone, it's Mark Bayer, and you are tuned to When Science Speaks. This episode of the show is sponsored by Bayer Strategic Consulting in Washington, D.C., which helps scientists get funding, gain influence, and build strategic relationships with the stakeholders who matter most in their professional world. Reaching those goals often involves effective translation of complicated research into engaging jargon-free communication that boils down complex topics to capture the attention of decision makers and general audiences. Interested in getting a free resource to help you do just that? Go to complexitymadeclear.com to get the 11 keys for translating complexity. That's complexitymadeclear.com to get your free infographic used by science communicators at major organizations to boil down, not dumb down, complicated science and technical topics for key stakeholders. I am so pleased to welcome Dr. Martin Zaumanis to the show today. Martins is a scientist, project manager at an interdisciplinary research institute in Zurich, Switzerland, that conducts cutting-edge materials and technology research. In Martin's research, he strives to bring sustainability to the core of road construction, studying asphalt recycling, the use of waste materials in road construction, and application warm mix asphalt technologies. Martins has research experience in 4 countries. Since 2011, he's authored more than 50 publications. He believes implementation of new technologies also depends on their acceptance in society and in industry, which has led him to communicate his findings actively through videos and at a TED conference. In 2016, Martins received the International Road Federation Award for the Best Research Project of the Year. He's a strong believer in knowing how to communicate your research, which he says can mean the difference between being invited to apply for a tenure track position and sending out CVs to random people on LinkedIn, for example. Martin's peer-recognized book holds practical advice for writing impactful research papers, and we're going to get to his latest book in just a moment. It's fantastic. Delivering powerful academic presentations, attracting research funding, and making your name known. Martin's earned his Ph.D. at Worcester Polytech Institute in the United States. Welcome to the show, Martins.
Thank you very much, Mark, for the very generous introduction, and thank you for inviting me for your podcast.
Sure, it's so great to have you here. How did you first get interested in scientific research and basically just a scientific career at the beginning, Martin?
I always liked learning new things. And at some point, I think it was during my master's studies, which I did in Denmark, I realized that there is actually a profession where you can learn things daily and get paid for it. And that was a revelation for me. And since then, I always wanted to become a scientist, and I still enjoy learning new things every day.
Absolutely. You just have published a book. It's the most recent book in your series. It's a book that's full of tips and techniques on science communication. And I'm wondering if you embrace the importance of being able to effectively engage general audiences early in your research career, or whether this realization happened later and maybe how it happened.
No, not at all. At the beginning, I thought science is about doing research and spending the time in the lab and writing research papers. But there was, nice that you asked, in fact, a very specific moment when I realized that without knowing how to present, I wouldn't be able to become a good scientist and be in peace with myself. And that was when I was doing my Ph.D. in the United States. I went to my very first scientific conference. It's the largest conference in the world in my domain. And there were about 200 people in the hall listening. And I was there on the stage. And when I got up there, I realized that I have the clicker in front of me and I have the screen behind me. So I had the clicker in front of me, and I had the screen in front in the corner of the room, and I couldn't really see my own slides.
Mm-hmm.
I I looked at the screen, and even though I had my glasses on, I couldn't read exactly what's there in the small charts and tables and so on. And there was no monitor in front of me, so I couldn't take a peek. And since there was a microphone in front of me, I couldn't go to the slides to peek at them. And at that moment, I froze. I didn't know what to do and what to say because I was totally lost. I already saw in my mind's eye that my professor is getting me fired after the first month of the PhD, and I have to go back home. At first, I was very angry with the. I thought, why don't they put a screen in front of me? And I heard the other presenters said the same. But when I went back home, I realized, okay, since I wasn't able to see the slides and I was right there on the stage, what about the 200 people which were in the audience who were much further from the slides than I was? And at that point, it clicked. I realized, okay, I have to learn how to present better and how to design presentation slides. And so I started reading some books, and I attended some courses about presenting. And then somehow gradually this went on, and I realized that really when I do better presentations, people listen more to me, they follow up more, they read my papers, and they become my partners in research. And really this leads to not only better, actually it leads to better research.
I love that story, Martins. It's so vivid. I feel your pain being up there and thinking, what am I supposed to do? I can't see the materials that I need to do my presentation. And how you described turning that negative into a positive, and that being the spark that sets you in this direction. It's just so interesting, and you adapted and you were curious. Obviously, you did a lot of research on how to put together effective and impactful presentations. You did an excellent TEDx talk recently, and that's how we started to connect. And I watched that. I was so impressed by it. And we're going to, of course, have a link in the show notes. I'd love for you to share with audiences how you prepared for it, maybe some of the elements that really stick out in your mind as being particularly high impact, because it's just so well crafted. And of course, it can only be like 17 minutes or something like that for a TED talk. So you were able to really distill all this information down and make it interesting to lay audiences.
Yeah. So first of all, the presentation was in 2015, so it's a while back.
Mhm.
And that was somehow for me, it was also a big milestone because up till that point, I always had presented to specialist audiences in specialist conferences in my narrow research field. And when you're doing a TED Talk, of course, it's still a sort of a scientific presentation. You are a scientist presenting your research, but it has to be understood by other people. And it was great that before the conference, the organizers actually offered us a course and guidance for how to prepare better. And one of the most vivid moments of that whole process, which lasted several months, was when I got to meet a theater director for a one-on-one session. We talked about my research, and I explained him a little bit about what is it that I'm doing. And at that point, he explained it back to me, and I realized, okay, he's doing a much better job than I am. And it's really, I got some goosebumps on my skin just listening to him explaining my own research to me. And then slowly he told me about all these other techniques which are besides being able to present facts and knowledge and logic and tables and diagrams. Now he told me about the emotions that help people remember presentations, about adding some jokes in the stories, adding some show elements, some stories, and all of these things. Of course, he didn't tell me exactly what to say, but I went back home and I started to think, what is it that I can add to my presentation that would really capture the attention of people, not only based on my science, but because they maybe can find this material asphalt really exciting. It's not only the black strip of road that you're going on and you notice it only when you get a bump, but actually there's something exciting.
And it's just funny because literally right by where I live, there's a lot of road work being done, a lot of asphalt, a lot of repaving, literally just a block or so away from here. And I was looking at it and I was thinking about our interview today. And definitely it's everywhere. And I think when people hear how you explain it and how you really make it interesting, that they will never look at asphalt and pavement the same again. And as you mentioned, your TEDx talk did not have any graphs or tables or data per se in that kind of format. Of course, you were conveying accurate information and facts and information, but it was done in a way that was not just able to be accessed, but really enjoyed by listeners. How can listeners learn from your approach as they prepare to participate in conferences, both as a featured speaker or a panelist, and also as a presenter, say during a poster session?
Yeah. So uh, first of all, you have to realize who is your audience. Who are you talking to? Like I said, in this case, in the TEDx talk, it was maybe not the specialist audience, but of course, if you're going to specialist conference, maybe you would prepare a little bit in a different. But I think it's very important to try to get people excited about what you're doing. So, of course, you're spending your whole time or most of your time in the lab doing research and they're really pumped up about this. But others don't feel the same way. So first, you have to somehow try to get them excited and tell the story of why this is important, what you're researching, and how you approach to solving it, and what would happen if you would solve or move a little bit one step closer to solving whatever problem you're researching. And that's very important because all these facts and tables and charts, obviously they are very important and they prove that you have some credibility, but people don't remember charts from presentations, right? So try to remember your last presentation that you attended. It's not like you remember the percentages or Pascals or whatever was there. You probably remember some story, some joke, some analogy from the presentation, some visual information which was on the slide. And that's what people get excited about. And then when they get back home, obviously they can Google you. They can say, okay, who's Martin Zaumanis? And let's see his papers, whether what he told there was true or not. And then they read up and in the serenity of their home and of their office, they can learn more about it.
That is so true. I always say, show the preview, not the movie. And you want to get people interested. And then, of course, they can follow up, like you suggest. They could follow up with you at the conference. They could ask you more detailed questions. They could follow up at home and then send an email or reach out to you for more specific information. But absolutely, the focus on getting people engaged is so important. I recently heard a true story about a scientist when she was told that she was going to be presenting her research to the public. She said something along the lines of, presenting to the public is not why I became a scientist. And your new book, which we're going to show right here, this excellent new book, Scientific Presentation Skills, How to Design Effective Research Posters and Deliver Powerful Academic Presentations. It's part of the peer recognized series book number 3 by Martin Zaumanis. And you talk about how it's really in the best interest of the scientist to be good at their presenting and sharing and communicating with general audiences. It's not like a nice to have, but it actually has a very strong benefit for scientists. And I'd love for you to address that because I think often there's this perception that effective science communication is something that would be nice if you had time, and people don't really understand or they don't consider working in that area to really be integral to what they do as a scientist, or even the benefits that could accrue to them from from a professional perspective, for example. And you address this in the book. Could you share more, elaborate a bit for our listeners?
First of all, I totally understand this mindset that I also didn't go into research because I wanted to be on the stage. I wanted to be in the lab doing research and writing papers. But as it turns out, being able to do good research is very much connected to the way that you were able to express yourself and to explain your research findings. So let me give you an example from this same TED conference. So after I gave the TED talk, maybe some half a year later, I got an email from a student in Bologna who had seen the presentation. He asked me a couple of questions, I answered, and that was that. But then, even maybe half a year more later, his supervisor was writing a research proposal and looking for partners. So this student went to his supervisor, said, okay, why don't you watch this TED talk? Maybe you like this guy. And he did. So he wrote me then and invited me to be a partner in the research project, really large research project with 14 participants from multiple different countries. And so I got to participate in the writing of the proposal. So I got to learn the writing skills. I got to engage with all these people, 14 different supervisors. Eventually we got the proposal approved. So we got funding for research. And now I could hire a student who was doing further research, not only my ideas, but also his own ideas. And he did a great job and we published a lot of papers. And so eventually you see this chain of reactions, which started from a presentation. Okay, in this case, it was the TED Talk, but obviously the same sort of mingling and follow-ups happen also after traditional scientific conferences.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
There's a lot of this background work that's being done after the presentations. And really, if you get in there with a nice presentation, it can really push forward your research career.
Thanks for that specific example, Martins. You had mentioned your exploration, your study, your work in science communication to become a really strong science communicator came out of this necessity, this idea that this situation where you couldn't actually see your slides. Of course, you could have left there and continued feeling disappointed and angry at the way the setup was, and then just continued creating the same kind of presentations as you had before. But at the next conference, you'd be able to see them better. But you decided to take a different tact, and that's made a huge difference, as we're obviously talking about right now. I'm wondering if, in addition to that feature, that fact, whether you had any other sort of elements in your professional, personal background that made you more inclined to have this capability, which you, as you described, you built over time. A lot of times when I talk to scientists who are gifted communicators, they will tell me, for example, that they're the first in their family to attend college, or the first in their family to attain a PhD, to earn a PhD, or that they're bilingual and English wasn't their first language. And so there are certain kind of hypotheses that I've developed around someone who's so gifted as a researcher also becomes a gifted communicator. And I'm wondering if there's anything beyond this one conference and your reaction to it, your very positive reaction to it, that maybe moved you a little bit more in the direction of wanting to focus on effective science communication.
First of all, I am not gifted at all in presenting. I'm the least gifted person probably in the universe. I really get very stressed when I have to go on the stage. Maybe now a little bit less, but it was really a problem. And I know it is a problem for a lot of scientists. But I realized this connection between being able to become a good researcher and the ability to explain things to people, not only scientists, but also other people. And I like dissecting things into smaller units. And that's what I did with the presenting skills. So I realized that there is not a single skill which is called presenting. It's rather a set of skills, as smaller elements that come together for building your ability to present things. So you have to learn how to do the presentation slides so that they're large enough for the audience to see and visual enough to provide some meaningful information. But you also have to learn to tell stories. You have to add some element of show. You have to polish your delivery. And of course, the basis of all of this is your scientific facts or the message that you're giving to the audience. But all of these smaller elements that come on top of it, they you can acquire them one by one. And that's what I also present in the book. So I call it the 5S presenting pyramid, where I present these 5 elements. I call them substance, structure, show, stories, and speaker, all starting with the letter S. And so you can really decide which of the elements are most important for you and acquire them, learn them one by one. First, by knowing that these skills exist. Otherwise, you can still live in your world thinking that there are some people who are naturally gifted at doing presentations and others are not. And maybe I'm just one of them and bad luck. But first of all, so you learn that this skill exists, and then you gradually practice once, twice, third time, and then maybe add the second skill and so on.
Yes, thank you for that. Couple things I want to highlight that you said that are just so key. One is that there are these various elements to being able to put together and communicate an excellent presentation, and it can be overwhelming to try to think of them all at once. So I really like your model and the methodology that you talk about in scientific presentation skills in your latest book, to just focus on one of those in the beginning and really get that one down and then move to the next. Because oftentimes we feel overwhelmed by trying to take on the entire thing and we just don't start at all because it's so daunting. Taking it piece by piece is a great example, great advice, I should say, for that. I guess as we wrap up, I would like to ask you, consistent with what I just said, is there one thing, if you could only give one piece of advice besides buying your book, which I highly recommend, if there one piece of advice that you could give to listeners who want to strengthen their communication muscles, what would that be? Maybe something they could do in the short term that would be doable, almost like a quick win kind of idea to get them on the path to even further improvement.
One thing that I can suggest is go to my website and download this 5S pyramid. I call it the cheat sheet. If you go to prerecognize.com /5, you'll find the cheat sheet with these 5 levels of pyramid and some tips for doing better presentations summarized in one single page. And then you can already start to acknowledge that there are these different skills. And once you know that they exist, you start noticing, just look at other presentations of other people that you like, how they present. They can be scientists or someone else. And you will notice that they use these elements and perhaps choose one element and work on it. And it doesn't have to be in the conference right away. Maybe you can use a dinner party, you can give a speech, you can join a Toastmasters club, whatever, get you in front of people and you start practicing.
Dr. Martin Zaumanis, thank you for being on the show, for providing, first of all, sharing your story, talking about your journey with respect to science communication, and then providing some actionable, specific things that people can do there and build upon their skills, how they can get started with something small, how they can do it informally with friends before they shouldn't feel like they need to try it out in a lab meeting or something like that. And that kind of mindset is really necessary before we make progress. So thanks for providing that approach to get people in the right frame of mind to really make progress here.
Thank you, Mark, very much for inviting me. And I hope that, scientists can start to communicate better and learn these techniques.
Thank you. And listeners, thank you for being here on this episode of When Science Speaks. And I hope you'll be back next time for the next episode of When Science Speaks.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to click subscribe. Check us out on the web at whensciencespeaks.com, and we'll see you next time.